And then what we're going to do is we want to delete the SK mannequin, and then we want to start positioning these bones so that they match a little bit better with what we're seeing with our character. And then we'll basically use this as a basis. And I'm going to go through this process pretty quickly. But basically, there's two rules that I try to follow with very, very limited exceptions. The main thing is that I try to rotate bones as much as possible without actually translating them. And if I do translate them, I try to translate them only on the axis that's following down the chain. So basically, in this case, it's probably going to be X in almost all situations. And I want to be a little bit careful that what I'm doing is roughly matching between the different sides. And I really don't want to do anything like deleting and then mirroring the joints, because it's more likely to produce errors than just basically setting it up like this. So I'm going to go through a quick process of kind of showing you how I would do this. And then I'm going to rig the character up and then bring her into Unreal. So the first thing that you want to keep an eye out for is whether or not the rotations are matching between two different sides. So for the most part, they usually are, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to turn on snapping for rotation. And so that's going to be discrete rotate. And for now, I'm going to do the step snap. Instead of 15, I'm probably going to do, I'm just going to do a step snap of 1. So that way I know that I'm going to be roughly similar, but I still have a lot of angles to control. And so then I can rotate that bone, and then I can match the rotation in this one. And then I can actually grab both of these bones, and I can't pull them up like this, but I can somewhat restrict them. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch to from object to world, and I'm going to hold down the D key while I'm dragging these bones. And what's actually going to happen is it's going to move that bone without moving any of the other connected bones. And that works in pretty much all cases. So then, okay, we've got kind of a good placement for those bones. But one thing that I know is going to be necessary is I need to actually snap this joint. So I'm going to turn on X-ray joints in here. I need to snap this joint to the joint for the feet, because basically these IK joints are used to control the placement of the feet and wrists. So I'm going to go ahead and start sliding this down a little bit. And I'm going to try to keep a proportional relationship, so as much as I can, not disrupting the placement. And then I want to go in and I'm going to switch to the object position for the, let's see. So a spot like this is a little bit tricky, and this might be a situation where I could validate only working on one side and then mirroring it, but I could also take a look at what the values are in my translation. So if a rig is correctly created, and this one certainly is, you should really see almost the exact values between the right and left side. So what that means is if I can position this this bone in the correct place, then I can actually position this one in the correct place by just doing essentially the negative version of that. So you'll notice that the translate x is 15785, and then here it's negative 15785. So that's extremely, extremely helpful. Let's see. So I can go ahead and try to find the right placement for this. Now, one thing that's worth noting when you're working on bone placements, and I know this is not a rigging class per se, but you usually would think that you want to put a bone like directly at the shoulder or kind of like directly at the elbow or something. But really, what you need to try to do as best as you can is put the bone in the center of the actual physical bone on the human body. That's extremely, extremely helpful to make sure that you're actually putting things in the right places. So basically, what you want to do is become a little bit familiar with human anatomy. So, for example, you can look at your own body and you can see where your joint is actually hinging from. So, like, for example, on the elbow, this is one that a lot of people tend to do wrong, is that the elbow bone is not really in the middle of the arm. It's actually kind of at the back of the arm because your arm rotates on kind of a hinge at the elbow. So it actually squeezes more on the inside and stays more straight on the outside. And so the same is true when you're talking about like shoulders, is you want to get a feel for where that rotation actually happens. And this is why you'll actually see a lot of animators do things where they're like moving their bodies around while they're working, and animators and riggers. Um, so you just want to get a good idea of where that actually is supposed to end up, and then you should be in pretty decent shape. Um, so I think we're looking at this one is probably going to be a little bit higher. Okay, so, and you can always do some tests to adjust this kind of thing. So it's not like you have to commit to it and then never change it. But okay, so then what I want to do is I want to try to get the other bone in the same position. So let me see. The first thing that I can try to do is I can just copy these values. Oops. So actually, go in there. So I've got my translate X, translate Y, and my translate Z. And I've got to make sure I'm grabbing the upper arm in this case and not the twist bone. But okay, so the first thing that I think that I'm going to want to do is make the x-axis negative. And then let's take a look at that. Okay. And if I make the y-axis negative and the z-axis negative. So actually, that looks like that's exactly correct. So that's one of the signs of Epic having made their their animations correctly and setting up their rig well. That's a good sign of, when you're working on your own rig, that's something that you want to watch out for. So let's make sure that we've got the head in the right position. So I think for the most part, this will probably be okay. But I want personally want to move the I think I want to move the head bone a little bit. Now, actually, there's one thing that I want to make a note of, and actually this hasn't been relevant yet, but on the move tool, there's actually an option for making bones affect the orientation for the selected component when you move it. And you really don't want to have that checked when you're working with a rig like this, because you don't want to move it and find out that it actually changed the orientation of your joints, because that'll end up creating a lot more problems in the future. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I think I've got the head mostly where I want it. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to rotate my arm bone here. And keep in mind that the rotations actually are pretty much the same. So there's 7.674, 40.301, negative 17.021. And that's actually the exact same rotations here. So I'm going to rotate this so that it looks like it's roughly following down. Then I'm going to switch to the translate option. And so in this one, I think that all I really have to do is I can go to translate X and I can middle mouse drag it up. And then I can also make some small rotation changes. So that'll work mostly correctly. I think that's about where the elbow is. And this is something that's really helpful because if a rig has been properly frozen, the only thing that's actually stored in the translate is the relative position between this bone and the other bones. So that's really, really helpful. And so then I can go ahead and, let's see, I can rotate this bone on kind of a gimbal. Let's see if I'm getting that mostly in the right place. And I can actually turn off the X-ray on the mesh so it's a little bit easier to see. And I can try to rotate this, this bone into position. And then I can basically do the same thing with the hand. I can just grab the translate X and I can just pull it up. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to worry about, in this tutorial, I'm not going to worry about the finger bones, because that's something, finger bones tend to take like 3 times as long as the entire rest of the rig. So I'm basically, in this case, all I want to do is actually just delete the finger bones. Now, again, if you're doing this for your own character and you want to have more functionality there, you may want to make sure that you still have those finger bones. The only thing that I want to make as a note about this rigging process is if you move the wrist into the right position, what generally people will do wrong is they'll actually make the wrist too far back in the actual arm, when it actually should be a little bit closer to the hand. So basically, you just want to look at your own wrist and see what is the actual like pivot point of the wrist, and it's right at about where the where your wrist kind of bones are, and you can feel them in your hand. But they're a little bit further down towards where your hand starts to expand out than you might think. And you'll usually, if you put it too far back, you'll notice your hand looks like it's kind of breaking and twisting. So you usually want it to be a little bit further into the right placement. But so okay, so let's see what we got here. So now I want to make sure that I have something equivalent on the other side. So I'm going to go and grab the rotations. And hopefully this will work. And yeah, and then this is really a sign of, like, good rigging practices. So then now I need to make my translate for the elbow the same value as my translate, same negative value as the translate. And that's because when these bones get mirrored across the two sides, on the right side the X is facing up the chain, and on the left side the X is facing down the chain. So I'm going to go ahead and then make sure that I've got the rotations the way that I want them. And I think that I should be able to use the exact same rotations if it's based on the other. So I'm just hitting Control C, Control V. And then the last thing that I want to do here is then just I'm going to be deleting the finger bones. And again, you would not delete the finger bones except for the sake of time in this case. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy, Control C, paste, Control V, and then just make sure that it's negative. And that should be pretty much exactly the same. And then the last thing that I'm doing here is I'm going to grab my my joints for the hand IK, and oops, actually want to make sure that I'm grabbing the correct one. And then I'm holding down the V key to snap it to the joint. And actually, you can also do, there's a snap to points, snap to curve, snap to grid. But yeah, the V key usually works pretty fine. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this last bone. And then mostly that should be pretty okay. Now let's go ahead and do a couple of cleanup steps. I think for the most part this should be okay, but what you do want to do is you want to freeze the transformations on the skeleton, on the skin. So I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and I'm going to do the Translate, Rotate, and Scale. And that, in this case, will just actually take the scale of the character and change it from a fractional number to 1.